Welcome to Pinnacle's NHL Best Bets. It's the start of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. I'm Anthony Bruno, joined by Scott Cullen on behalf of Pinnacle, and we are going to run through all 8 first-round series in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. We're going to give you our picks, our predictions. So let's have some fun with this. Scott, let's start in the Eastern Conference. Leafs-Bruins, it looks like one of the most tightly contested series. Where are you leaning in this one?
What a way to start this, Anthony. I think I'm leaning towards the Leafs of all teams. Can you believe it? And obviously, we have to ignore Maple Leafs history because in that case, you would never pick them to ever win, given what they've done in the playoffs, and particularly against a team like the Bruins. But what has me leaning towards the Leafs is that the Bruins have not been that strong a team this year. I mean, their record has turned out pretty well, in large part because of goaltending. Their tandem of Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark is one of the best in the league, but only one of them gets to play in any given game. And the Bruins, otherwise, have been a very mediocre possession team. This is what happens when Patrice Bergeron retires. Is suddenly your team doesn't control play in the same way. And I think with the Bruins, if they're not controlling play in that way, that leaves them vulnerable. And so the Maple Leafs, yes, it's been kind of a long wait for any kind of playoff success, and people have been kind of hammering that yes, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner need to rise to the occasion. Well, here it is. Go beat the Boston Bruins in the first round as slight underdogs. They offer a little bit more value to me. And I don't say that with infinite confidence, but if I have to choose, the Maple Leafs are my pick.
All right, and right now the Leafs are slight underdogs at Pinnacle, plus 108, the Bruins minus 123. Listen, I'm a Leaf fan, okay? So obviously I want the Leafs to get through the first round. There's been a lot of pain following this team in the Matthews and Marner era. And usually I am on the Leafs. Like over the last few years, I've given them the edge in the first round against pretty much everyone who they've played. I just don't feel great about this team this year. And I know they are dogs, and maybe this is a spot where you actually could bet them as underdogs because the last 3 or 4 years they've headed into the first round as favorites. I just look at the season series. Boston outscored the Leafs 10-5 at 5-on-5, 14-7 total. The Leafs only held around 44% of the expected goals at 5-on-5. The Bruins had an outrageous save percentage against the Leafs in the regular season, a .949 save percentage. So will that continue? Probably not. I just don't feel great about the Leafs defensively. And it's not even defensively. I know the Leafs are a better offensive team, but in the playoffs, they've had so much trouble generating offense in high leverage situations. And I'm afraid that from what I saw in the regular season, that this is going to continue in the playoffs against Boston. And one other thing, every time the Leafs and Bruins have played this season, for the most part, David Pastrnak has been the best player on the ice. So you know what? I'm riding with the Boston Bruins.
You're going with the Bruins.
I'm riding with the Bruins in the first round.
I tell you, Anthony, I don't take the Maple Leafs with a ton of confidence. Their game against the Florida Panthers in Game 81, they had a strong first period, and I thought, whoa, the Maple Leafs are getting ready for the playoffs. They gave up 30 shots in the second period. I don't know if I've ever seen an AHL team give up 30 shots in a period. And so it's certainly not a team that has high hopes for the playoffs and expects to do something like a week later. So we'll see whether they can bounce back. But given the choice, I think the Bruins are not quite as good as the record suggests. So that's why I'm on the Leafs.
Yeah, no, I do tend to agree with you. I think the Bruins in the second half of the season haven't been as good, but the Leafs, the last week and a half have limped into the playoffs. So I would be shocked, honestly, Scott, if this series doesn't go 6 or 7 games.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the other series in the Atlantic. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning as dogs going up against the Florida Panthers, one of the betting favorites to win the Stanley Cup. Who do you have in this series?
I'm with the underdogs here.
Okay.
In large part because I think this is going to be a competitive series, and so therefore the price on Tampa Bay is more appealing. And honestly, for a long part of the season, I would have happily taken Florida, and because Tampa just didn't look good. They had been mediocre, and on top of that, Andrei Vasilevsky was probably less than mediocre in goal. He was coming off back surgery, missed almost 2 months to start the year, and for the next 3 months or so, really struggled. And if that was the Andrei Vasilevsky who was heading into the playoffs, this would be a no-brainer for me. Take Florida and go. But in the last dozen or so games, Vasilevsky has like a .916 save percentage, and all of a sudden, well, if you're getting playoff Andrei Vasilevsky, the guy who's led them to 2 Stanley Cups and another Stanley Cup final, that changes the calculation a little bit. And as much as you can look at Florida has better underlying numbers, they're one of the top possession teams in the league. I look at Tampa Bay's their core, and these are guys who have done it before and many times. And so if you think that this series is a close and competitive series, well, then getting Tampa Bay as underdogs around plus 170, that offers more value to me. I mean, I think this is totally a series that can go 6 or 7 games. And if we get to that point where it's game 7 and you're flipping a coin, well, the team who's plus 170 is offering better value.
Oh, this is going to be a really interesting series because I think the Panthers are definitely the better team. I've been high on the Panthers since the preseason, really. I still think that they're arguably the most well-rounded team in the NHL, at least one of the most well-rounded teams, and I still think they're going to make a deep run in the playoffs. I've been kind of on their bandwagon, like I said, for pretty much the entire season. Now, what I will say is that this opened around plus 140 for the Lightning, and now the Lightning are sitting around like plus 161. So it is kind of intriguing, honestly, looking at that price on the Lightning, but I got to stick with my Florida Panthers. What I'm looking at actually is the Panthers to close out this series in 6 games or less. Minus 1.5 games at plus 109 right now on Pinnacle. The Panthers outscored the Lightning 9-6 at 5-on-5 in the regular season, 15-9 in total. The Lightning had the expected goal share slightly. I just think that the Panthers are a more well-rounded team. The Lightning have a lot of great players. Their core is still intact. If playoff Andrei Vasilevsky shows up, the Lightning are going to be in great shape. But I just think when you go through the lineup, you look at the Panthers from an offensive standpoint, defensive standpoint, Bobrovsky. Like last year, Bobrovsky went into the playoffs like playing terribly, and then he was a monster in the playoffs. And this year, he had a great regular season. So, I mean, we'll see who shows up in the playoffs. But I'm going to stick with the Panthers here. Minus 1.5 games at plus 109. All right, Scott, Capitals Rangers. This is a very lopsided series mostly because the Capitals stink, honestly. Yes. So is there any chance that the Capitals can keep this close, or are the Rangers just going to run them over in this spot?
Well, I expect that the Rangers will run them over. I'm not sure I like having to pay the premium that it costs to take the Rangers just to win the series. I know we're, I believe, minus 440 for the Rangers to win the series at Pinnacle. And look, hockey, things happen, right? And a hot goalie can steal you some games. And like I say this, having no respect for the Washington Capitals this year. They're a team that really doesn't deserve to be in the playoffs. They somehow managed to get the points to get there, but their goal differential minus 37. It's been more than 30 years since the team made the playoffs with that kind of goal differential. And so, yes, they should get steamrolled in the first round by the President's Trophy winners. That's what you would expect. But if Charlie Lindgren goes in and puts up a .960 save percentage for a couple of weeks, you never know. And so that is why I would be. I take the Rangers to win the series, but I would be looking to other markets rather than just the series price, because I don't like the idea of any team being favored by requiring them to win 80 or 85% of the time. That's just a really daunting task. Like if the Rangers were playing the San Jose Sharks for a series, sure, then I'll take that. But the Capitals, as much as I don't have any respect for what they've done this season, they're not the San Jose Sharks.
What's really stood out to me about this Rangers team, so obviously they won the President's Trophy, but you look at their 5-on-5 numbers. They had a +1 goal differential at 5-on-5 this season. And even their matchup with the Caps this season, like the Caps actually outscored the Rangers 9-8 at 5-on-5 in the season series. In total, the goals were 9-9. The Caps slightly held the expected goal share at 5-on-5. And I'm not saying that the Caps, are going to win this series, but it's interesting when you look at the 5-on-5 numbers here. I mean, obviously the Rangers have a really good power play. They have Igor Shesterkin in net. I mean, I still like them to win the series, but I'm not as bullish on the Rangers in terms of making a deep run and winning the Stanley Cup when you compare them to the other top teams in the NHL. So, listen, the Capitals stink. You said it. Minus 37 goal differential. Maybe they take a game. Maybe they take 2 games. I think if you're going to look at anything here, maybe the Rangers on the series handicap to win in 6 games or less, minus 191. Otherwise, I might even just stay away from this series. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
No, I think that's a fair approach because the Capitals haven't done anything to inspire great confidence here, and but at the same time, as I say, weird things happen in hockey, particularly playoff hockey. That this might just be a series to avoid.
Yeah, fair enough. How about this other series in the East? Islanders and Hurricanes, another lopsided series on paper. Islanders right now plus 340 at Pinnacle. The Hurricanes massive favorites at minus 403. Is this very similar to this Rangers Cap series where, I mean, you know what? Listen, the Islanders have actually been playing some pretty good hockey. Like, do they have any chance of making this a close series, do you think, against Carolina?
Well, a better chance than I would say for the Capitals because, the Islanders won 9 of their last 11 games to get into the playoffs, and there are all kinds of problems that have kind of lingered with the Islanders that they don't score enough, and really their goaltender down the stretch tended to be Semyon Varlamov, who was their backup for the past several seasons, but he'd been putting up better numbers, and so he's seems like he's going to be the one who gets a crack in the playoffs, and but I look at that Islanders team, and if they're competitive and they have enough guys who have been on conference finalists, right? They went to the conference finals kind of 2 years in a row, and if you have guys who have that experience who are not going to be fazed by it, then they should give the Hurricanes more of a test. And now I say this, the Hurricanes, I think, should be, they're the deserving Stanley Cup favorites, basically. They have the shortest odds on Pinnacle, and they were the top possession team in the league. And the big complaint over the Hurricanes for several years is that, they have these great possession numbers, but they don't have guys who can finish. And, they went and traded for Jake Gensel, and Gensel has been great for them. And does that give them, that extra push they need offensively to get over the top? Like Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis and Teuvo Teravainen and Andrei Svechnikov, they've got, enough talent up front that you would think that they can not only dispatch the Islanders but go on a good playoff run. But this is another case where do I like them to win 80% of the time? That kind of probability. That gets pretty dicey, and I think this is where again you end up looking at the other markets. Is it better to take them minus a game and a half, and kind of limit your investment, I guess, at that point, because any time you have to go minus 400 or more, that series really better be lopsided, and I'm not sure the Islanders are bad enough to make that worthwhile.
Yeah, and it looks like Varlamov is going to get the start in game 1. He has been red hot for this Islanders team. I think that they could potentially make this a little bit of a series, maybe take it to 6 games potentially, but you said it with Carolina. I love that they picked up Jake Gensel at the deadline, Evgeny Kuznetsov, you said Seth Jarvis, he had a breakout season, and a healthy Andrei Svechnikov, who was not healthy last season in the playoffs. And this team right now, they're locked and loaded. I don't think there's any... I don't want to say there's no chance they lose in this first round, but they look like one of the best teams in the NHL right now. As you said, the Cup favorites at Pinnacle. There's no way I'm laying minus 403, especially because these Islanders goalies, whether it's Varlamov or Sorokin for that matter, could get hot at any moment. But maybe you look at some of these other markets, Hurricanes minus 1.5 games at minus 177. But I think it's safe to say we're both on board with the Hurricanes getting through the New York Islanders. All right, Western Conference. I think this is going to be a great series. Avalanche and Jets. So the Avalanche right now, minus 129, the Jets at plus 112. But the Jets, Scott, dominated the season series. So where are you at right now with how this is going to play out?
And I say this completely surprised in my own decision here. I like the Jets. For most of the season, I would have been inclined to go, you know what, I ride with the Avalanche. I think McKinnon and Makar are like two of the most amazing players in the league, and that, yeah, they'll make the difference because the Jets don't have, for all the talent they have, they don't have guys at the level of McKinnon and Makar. Where the Jets do have a star is in net, right? Connor Hellebuck is likely to win the Vezina Trophy again this year, and he's been, one of the top goalies in the league for virtually his entire career. And under normal circumstances, I don't love pinning your hopes on a series on a goaltender. That's a lot for one guy to have to handle. But when you see what's going on in net with the Avalanche right now, Alexander Gorgiev is really struggling. His last 8 appearances has an .856 save percentage. There's been some talk whether Justice Annunen, the rookie who I believe started 11 games this year, that he might get starts. And if that's the case, and you're going up against the guy who's the best goalie in the league, that seems like a decided advantage. And the Jets, go into the playoffs on an 8-game winning streak. And what was interesting about them is that they, when they traded Pierre-Luc Dubois last summer, it was kind of, the Jets are taking a step back, but they improved their depth in making that trade. And while you lose kind of some flash and some high-end talent, the depth is actually what works for the Jets. Is that they roll over their lines and can be kind of relentless. And in a playoff series, that can work. And so something I wouldn't have said a month ago, but I'm kind of leaning in that direction now. Is I'll take the Jets for a bit of an upset.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying the Connor Hellebuck factor. He's basically the best goalie in the NHL. He's probably going to win the Vezina Trophy this year. They have depth. They're better than Colorado defensively. I just have a hard time overlooking the star talent on Colorado's roster. When you're looking at McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, even the way that Drouin has played. They brought in Casey Middlestad as well. Like last year heading into the playoffs, I felt like the Avalanche had no depth really outside of their top guys. Yeah. Whereas this year they're kind of going in with a little bit more depth. McKinnon probably going to win the Hart Trophy. And I know that the Jets have dominated the season series. Like they outscored Colorado 17-4 in total, yes. 12-3 at 5-on-5. They won all 3 games in regulation. But despite that, I'm rolling with the Colorado Avalanche. Playoff Nathan McKinnon, that guy's a different animal. I know this is slated to be a very close series, but right now I'm leaning with the Avalanche at minus 129. It makes a ton of sense, honestly, to roll with the Jets based on everything that you mentioned, but I just think this is going to be one of those series where Colorado is able to generate offense. And one thing about the Jets, they had one of the worst penalty kills of all playoff teams this season. So that could be a factor with Colorado's power play as well. So I'm rolling with the Avalanche. Scott's rolling with the Jets. How about Golden Knights Stars? The Stars had a great season. The Golden Knights, Scott, not quite as dominant as we've seen in previous years when it comes to possession numbers, 5-on-5 play. So where are you at right now with Golden Knights versus Stars?
I think if the Golden Knights didn't win the Stanley Cup last year, we wouldn't be giving them a second thought. That you would look at what that team has done this year, and it's been very inconsistent and generally mediocre, and you go, oh, well, the Dallas Stars have played so much better this year. They should win this series. And now the Golden Knights are going to have Mark Stone back, it appears, managing their cap.
Of course, he comes back right at the perfect time as usual.
Get the captain back in time for the playoffs, and not a moment too soon. But I don't think that the Golden Knights have played well enough to think, oh yeah, they're gonna take the Dallas Stars. The Stars have they've been consistent, and they've got really good balance in that they have veteran guys like Joe Pavelski and Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. Then they've got young guys like Wyatt Johnston had a really awesome second season. Rupe Hintz is a legit star. And when they added Logan Stankoven, who they called up from the American Hockey League, that added more depth to the Stars' attack. And so I look at that and think they're deserving favorites in this series, and I expect the Stars to be a legitimate cup contender. And if that means knocking off last year's cup champions, then that's what happens, because I haven't been impressed with Vegas for most of this season.
No, I'm in the same boat as you. Vegas just has not looked as good, and I know that they've had some injuries, and now, of course, they're getting healthy at the perfect time as per usual, and they just won the Stanley Cup last season, and, there's going to be a lot of people that are riding with the Golden Knights, but this is a Dallas Stars team, much the same as what I kind of talked about when we were going through the Panthers and the Hurricanes. Like, I think the Stars, those are the three teams that stick out to me as like the most complete teams in the NHL, just when you look at offense, defense, goaltending. I think the Stars are the better team here. So not only do I think they are going to win this series, I actually think they're going to get this done in 6 games or less. So I think it's worth sprinkling on Stars minus 1.5 games at plus 142.
There you go.
So
I was going to say one more point for the
Yeah.
Stars is that Jake Ottinger for most of the season wasn't having a great season, but in the last month, it appears his game has turned around a bit, and given his playoff history already, I mean, he's very young, but has shown some big game potential, I guess, in previous playoffs. So that's yet another reason that I like the Stars' chances. That I already like the team in front of him, but if Ottinger is playing well, that's just another reason to expect them to take the series.
Yeah, playoff Jake Ottinger, that guy's an animal. So we're both riding with the Dallas Stars. This is a very interesting series, Scott. Predators Canucks, because the Canucks had a great season. A lot of people called them PDO merchants throughout the season with their shooting percentage and save percentage being so good. And now they face a Predators team that has been absolutely red hot. They have the best record in the NHL since February 17th at 25-3. And right now at Pinnacle, plus 139 for the Preds. The Canucks are the favorites at minus 160. Where are you leaning in this series?
Well, you see, you don't cancel a trip to the Sphere, and that's what happened with Nashville. They got blown out at home by Dallas. The team canceled a planned outing to go see U2 at the Sphere in Vegas, and then Nashville went on an 18-game point streak, and all of a sudden they went from this team that maybe was kind of battling for a playoff spot to, well, now look at they've been the best team in hockey since then, and it basically changes expectations. And the Predators, they control play, not to the degree that Carolina does, because no one is at that level, but they're on the plus side of shot attempts and expected goals, and when you can do that and have a goaltender like UC Saros, you give yourself a chance. And then what Nashville also has is that they've got some star players who can kind of elevate and make a difference. And Philip Forsberg has stayed healthy this year, and the results kind of lived up to expectations, I guess, with him. I mean, he's had a lot of seasons where he's been able to score, but he's scored in 62 games or 66 games or whatever. This year he stayed healthy, and you got 47 goals out of him. And you got Roman Josi, made a late charge again for the Norris Trophy. And if you have those kinds of players, that can make a difference. Now, Vancouver, they have star players too, right? Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes and JT Miller. That's kind of the MO for the Canucks, is that they lean on those guys to carry them through. And when you're a team like the Canucks who kind of rides percentages, like they scored on 12% of their shots this year, which is, that's the kind of thing you would say is unsustainable. And it's exactly the kind of thing that goes away in a playoff series, that, oh, wow, we didn't expect to lose. Yeah, because you didn't score on 12% of your shots anymore. That kind of thing can happen. But if you have guys like Miller and Pettersson who typically finish at a high percentage, that's part of the reason that the Canucks can do it. But having said all this, I think it's a very even looking series, which means I like the Predators because as underdogs they pay better, and so in a series that I think is virtually a coin flip, I prefer Nashville.
No, I'm right there with you, Scott. I view this series as more of a coin flip as well, and we're getting the Predators at plus 139. I'm going to be taking that as well. I talked about how hot that they've been since February, 25-3 over the last 28 games to finish off the season. They have great possession numbers. Their 5-on-5 numbers are good. And you said it. When you have Philip Forsberg, Roman Josi, and UC Saros, I mean, those guys could match up all day long against the best player at each position on the Canucks. And I know the Canucks have great players. They've had great seasons. One thing I will say is that Elias Pettersson, he really slowed down towards the end of the season. I believe he finished with just 2 goals in his last 12 games. So he's been he hasn't been great, so we'll see if he can pick up his game. But we're getting the Preds here as underdogs, and I'll be on them as well.
One more point I want to make is everybody has made this, well, now Thatcher Demko is healthy. Okay, well, he started 2 games late in the season, but he had missed 5 weeks. So I'm not as entirely sold that Thatcher Demko is healthy and he's going to be in perfect health all the way through the playoffs. Maybe he will be, but it's just another kind of factor to add some concern to the Canucks.
No, that's a great point. And with goaltending in general in the playoffs, you just never know. Kind of like how I mentioned.
Oh, no, you didn't think Aiden Hill was going to be the star of last year's playoffs? Come on.
Oh, it's just it's insane.
Aiden Hill and Sergei Bobrovsky were the 2 goalies in the Stanley Cup final last year, and no one had any expectations of them going in. It's
crazy how goalies will just come out of nowhere. And you said it with Aiden Hill and Bobrovsky last season. Like we mentioned how Bob, in the regular season was terrible, and then the playoffs start and he's just absolutely dominant. And then he kind of fell off a cliff when Florida played Vegas in the Stanley Cup final. So goaltending is so volatile. It's hard to pin down which goalie is honestly going to show up in any of these series. But no, that's a great point that you made about Thatcher Demko. This last series, we've now seen it, or we're going to see it for the 3rd year in a row. Kings and Oilers in the first round. The Oilers pretty big favorites at Pinnacle, minus 205. The Kings at plus 178. Much like the Florida Panthers, I've been pretty high on Edmonton most of the season as well, despite their 2-9-1 start when it looked like they were dead in the water. But they have been one of the best teams in the NHL since that horrid start. So who do you like in this series, Scott?
Yeah, I think I'm on board with you here that the Oilers, I mean, even at the start of the season, I liked the Oilers, thought they were a legit Stanley Cup contender, and they got off to that ridiculously bad start. But I looked at their underlying numbers, and their underlying numbers weren't bad. They just couldn't get a save. And so Jack Campbell ends off in the American Hockey League, and it took some time for Stuart Skinner to come around. But all they need is Stuart Skinner to be adequate. They do not need their goaltender to steal them games, because that hasn't been what drove them to this record. They have generally the 2nd or 3rd best possession numbers, depending on what you're looking at, behind Carolina. And so if you have those kind of possession numbers, the Oilers have had a strong power play for about 5 years running. This year they're 2nd behind Tampa Bay in goals per 60 at 5-on-4, and I think 3 of the previous 4 seasons they were number 1. So when you roll McDavid and Draisaitl out there, they tend to know what they're doing, and that power play is a big advantage to have in the playoffs. And so as much as you might like to think that the Kings have learned something having gone through this matchup before, I think what they're going to learn is that we don't have players at the level of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and that I prefer the Oilers here, even as the heavy favorites, not as heavy as say Carolina or the Rangers, but they're pretty sizable favorites in this series, but I think it's justified.
Yeah, I'm on the Oilers as well. When you look at their 5-on-5 numbers, they've been great all season. As you said, that terrible start was mostly due to Stuart Skinner and Jack Campbell not being able to stop a beach ball. And and we have no idea really, Scott, like how well Stuart Skinner is actually going to play in the playoffs, because he's one of those goalies, right? Like he's not in the elite tier. He's kind of in like that middle tier. You don't really know what you're going to get from him. But you do know at least based on track record, that Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are probably going to dominate in the playoffs as they usually do. The Oilers, as I said, great 5-on-5 team. We know that they can score. They're big favorites here. I expect them to win. I know that the Kings have played them pretty close the last couple of years in the playoffs, but I think the Oilers find a way to get through this. I'm going to say it's going to be more comfortable than it has been in the past for the Oilers in this series. I even like them at -1.5 games at +104. So I think the Oilers get the job done, and I could see them going on a pretty deep run here in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that while you're going to have questions about Stuart Skinner because he just doesn't have a playoff track record, it's not like you can look down at Cam Talbot for the Kings and go, oh, the Kings have the answer there, because you don't know. And we've just talked about how unpredictable goaltending can be, and how we can be surprised by what somebody's going to deliver in the playoffs. So maybe Cam Talbot will be, the star goalie of the playoffs, but it also might be Stuart Skinner. And so if with that kind of uncertainty, look to the high-end talent that the Oilers have. That should make the difference.
Before we wrap up, Scott, do you have a Stanley Cup pick as of now? And maybe this will change as the playoffs go on, but if you had to pick a team right now, who do you like to win
If I have to pick a team, I'm going with Carolina, and I know taking the team that's the Stanley Cup favorite is hardly a bold choice. But when they made the trade to get Gensel, I was like, this is a team that is finally kind of addressing what has been a longstanding need. That, yes, they can always get into the playoffs because they're controlling 58 or 60% of the shots. I mean, that can get your team into the playoffs all the time. But they always would run into some problem in the playoffs because they weren't scoring enough. And so you go out and get a guy like Gensel, and Gensel has stepped in. I think he has 25 points in 17 games. Like, yeah, that's a big addition to put in your lineup. And I think that should be enough to get them over the top.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with you. They're one of the most complete teams in the league. I also like a team from the Eastern Conference right now, and that's the Florida Panthers, another team that I think is just extremely well-rounded. They went into a little bit of a lull before the end of the season, but then kind of closed out the season on a high note. So right now I do like the Panthers to win the Stanley Cup. But listen, when you're betting on either cup futures, series prices, game by game, you got to head to Pinnacle because we have some of the best odds in the industry. Like, you look at any slate in the NHL throughout the playoffs, whether you're looking at main markets, player props, Pinnacle's going to have some of the best prices in the industry. So definitely head there to place some wagers. But that's going to do it for our first round Stanley Cup preview. As I said, check out Pinnacle for a lot of the best prices. Me and Scott will be here throughout the playoffs, breaking things down series by series. But until then, enjoy the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Good luck with your bets. And remember to bet smart and bet Pinnacle.